You know, time travel is a very, very interesting thing. I mean, it opens up so many possibilities for many stories you could tell, whether they range from like the kid-friendly exploration-style adventures or the kind that really make you think. And, well, this week's subject is definitely the kind that really makes you think. At least in my opinion. But with that said, let's get started with this next episode of Romney's Reviews. Like other people, this is actually one of those films that I was really excited for. Mostly, well, a lot of other people were excited mostly because the director, Rian Johnson, has previously worked with Joseph Gordon-Levitt on the film Brick, which is essentially a film noir set in a high school. That was one reason why people were excited. The reason why I'm excited is that I'm always fascinated by sci-fi films that always, well, try something unique and different with science fiction instead of trying to copy other people. So the first thing that I'm probably going to be talking the most about is the story, and, well, this story is one of the most dense stories I've seen in a film this year. And, I mean, just, yeesh. There's a lot of layers. It's not like so layered that you get lost easily, but let's just say there's a lot of things that come into play that you do have to kind of keep in mind, especially when it comes to what you're told. And I definitely like how instead of giving us like a huge scientific exposition dump like a lot of other sci-fi films, when it comes to just things they establish like the time travel, the concept of the loopers, as well as people with telekinesis, it's kind of giving you straightforward in terms as if you were talking to a mobster who knew about time travel rather than a scientist. Especially with how they treat time travel, they don't try to treat it as something that everybody already knows the intricacies about. It's just a case of where everybody knows about it but is equally as confused about it. So that's one thing that I definitely like, and just the way the story plays out, at least when I was watching it, there's just a lot of things I couldn't really guess where it was going to go. I mean, first I had one idea, but then it was going down different paths, and then there were different things the characters did, and then the ending. Whew. Although the ending is very logical and makes sense, it still was very surprising, given the characters' traits. Like, the main character's traits, it's an ending you don't quite expect, but when you really think about it, it all makes sense at the end, which is a Hank Green song. As for this particular style of story, I guess the best way to describe it is essentially a science fiction story mixed with neo-noir. Given Rian Johnson, I really need to look that up, given the director's previous work, it's not that surprising. Now, as for the visual aesthetic of the film and kind of the more technical aspects of the film, visuals, although there were some really creative shots, there's nothing like really super memorable that a lot of people are going to be referencing anytime soon. But it's basically, I didn't notice so much with the visual, like the cinematography, but I did notice with more of the mise-en-scène, more of the visual style, the stuff you actually see. Because even when you see things that are supposed to be bright and colorful, everything still kind of has this nice earthy, dingy tone to it. I mean, even when you're like in a place where there's like lots of plants and stuff, most films will try to make those plants look more green, but this film, everything's kind of kept nice earth tone and almost kind of washed out to really establish the kind of world this is. It's not a very colorful world, it's a very grayish world. It's a story filled with a lot of grays, and so it's a movie that's also filled with a lot of grays. Even in the places that seem colorful, they still have a lot of grays. I like it when a film matches a lot of the visual stuff that you see in the scenery to the type of film, instead of just focusing so much on matching how it's shot to the film. It actually goes the extra mile and matches essentially the color scheme of the film. And that was another thing I like from a technical standpoint. So, to pretty much summarize, the story is really dense but also really well written. The pacing is good, dialogue's good, and just the way this whole story plays out is really good. Technical standpoint is very standard, so there's not much really to talk about there except for the visual aesthetic, which matches the film really well. And that's all I can really say about this film. I mean, even when I tried to find flaws within it, there weren't really that many flaws. It may be lost on some people, but I still find it to be a really good film. Now, I normally don't like to give rated R films this rating on my scale, but I couldn't find any detraction in it, so yeah, I'm gonna have to give Looper a 5 out of 5. The cheapskate in me says you never really need to rush out to see any film, so I'm not gonna say you need to rush out and see it right now, but you definitely do need to see it while it's still in theaters, is all I'm saying, because it's an awesome film. And, well, that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. It was really, really short because there wasn't really much else to say about the film aside from how awesome the story was. As for next week, you're going to be getting another double feature thing, but don't worry, I'll have them as 2 separate episodes. I learned my lesson from last time. So next week, the 2 movies that I'll be reviewing are Frankenweenie and Taken 2. See you then. Now for some little, fun time travel knowledge if you're still watching past the, brief credit sequence. Because one of the major time travel things I noticed is that this is almost kind of like a nice little twist on the grandfather paradox. For those of you who don't know, the grandfather paradox is sort of a time travel, thought experiment thingy. But here's basically how it pans out. Say you have a scientist, he creates some sort of wormhole or some sort of time machine, goes back in time to where his grandfather is a young man and kills him, therefore the grandfather never fathered his father, and therefore his father never fathered him. But the problem is, if his father didn't exist and his grandfather died, how did the grandfather die? Because if the grandson didn't exist to go back in time to kill him, he couldn't have possibly died. And so, it's essentially one of those paradoxes that people believe will essentially cause the universe to implode should it ever come up. Now, there's a lot of theories with time travel that kind of somewhat disprove it. One of the biggest ones is the cosmic intervention theory, where the universe will essentially act against you to prevent you from killing your grandfather should you ever try it. For example, if you were using a gun, the gun would jam as soon as you tried to pull the trigger, or if you tried to use a knife, either you wouldn't be able to get the knife, the blade would break, or somehow the grandfather would suddenly be a master of kung fu and take it from you. And I don't know what other theories there could be, because time travel is both fascinating and very, very confusing, and a lot of people in film and television have really mucked around with it, both for better and for worse. One notable thing of something that never quite made sense was the Star Trek logic of time travel, where you could kill your past self without any real consequences. That never quite made sense, but then again, I'm not a Trekkie. And yeah, I just find time travel very, very fascinating. I mean, one of my favorite films is Back to the Future. I used it as an example of a number 5 rating, which is probably why I also gave Looper a number 5. This post-credit thing is probably taking really long, but I could talk about this sort of thing all day. I have done it, in fact. People kept telling me to shut up, throwing stuff at me, using duct tape. I can still hear the screams.